Workplace drug tests are a form of test which measures the quantity of substance in the body. Typically, this would be cannabis, cocaine, amphetamines, opiates, benzodiazepines and other products that may be present in the body. And samples are usually taken from urine, hair, blood and sweat. Though there are some companies who specialize in this form of testing, there's always a risk that this form of testing may produce false positives, but generally they're used in the industries and sectors where there's a high degree of health and safety requirement. So drug testing is used by employers who need to ask themselves, what is the policy of drug testing and why do we need it and what are we trying to achieve here? And it's primarily the health and safety of the employees and those who work in the workplace, and typically these are drivers, factory workers, other individuals who face health and safety hazards and need to be fully functional and not impaired in any way by drugs or alcohol. Whether employers can test whoever they want and when they want, the answer is simply no. They have to have a contractual requirement to do so, and employees have to give their consent. Tests must be carried out completely randomly. If they focus particularly on one section of their employee workforce, like women for example, then they are discriminating against those women and in favour of men, and so therefore they should be completely even-handed and random test. Well, employers need to be aware that all tests should be carried out as per instructions. And this may sound obvious, but there are some tests which can be carried out quite simply, and there are other tests which are not so simple and require a certain amount of training. The other important thing to remember is that if someone tests positive for excess alcohol or drugs, then the spotlight turns to the employer in relation to what they do next. Is this a disciplinary matter because of misconduct, such as a breach of a drugs policy, or is this a capability issue where the employee would be expected to have some support and sympathy from the employer in getting them through this difficult phase in their lives? If an employee tests positive for drugs or alcohol, then the company could enforce its drug and or alcohol policy if there's a zero tolerance policy, so that if someone tests positive, then that could mean that they are entitled to face the consequences of that, and that could mean a dismissal without notice for gross misconduct. But in almost every case, employers will expect to carry out a full investigation, which includes not only the test and how that came out, but also the surrounding circumstances before they rush to dismiss. So if an employee discloses to their employer that they have a drug or alcohol dependency, then the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 kicks in, because that imposes the duty on the employer to protect the health and safety of all employees, including the person who has that dependency, and therefore they need to take steps to try and prevent that person continuing in their course of action for their own safety and also for the health and safety of other employees. Now, this could take the form of two courses of action. One could be the disciplinary measure, which I've spoken about just a short time ago, involving a series of warnings and perhaps a dismissal for gross misconduct. Or they could take a much more supportive role, which is to put them into a drug rehabilitation program and to support them in that way, to try and get them to kick the habit and so that they function as a normal employee without relying upon those kinds of drugs and alcohol. It's perhaps no surprise that over the last 2 years that more than a quarter of employers have had to discipline a member of their workforce for drug and alcohol abuse. And this is probably synonymous with COVID. We know that there has been an increase in psychological problems, depression and anxiety associated with COVID and the return to normal life. So my advice for employers is to give this some serious thought, create a policy which has at its centre the support and welfare of employees, to try and deter them away from resorting to these forms of substances and alcohol, in an effort to try and improve productivity and to enable them to fully function in the workplace. And this really does mean wellness in the workplace and trying to address the problem as quickly as possible and at early stages before they develop into really serious problems, and then you have to go down to the disciplinary route.